Hello there. Look what we have here. An incredible movie land website. This site includes an impressive slider, smooth and professional animation effects, a sleek navigation bar featuring a logo, menu items, and a search bar. Plus, it's fully responsive, designed to work seamlessly on all devices, including tablets and mobiles. In this video, you'll not only learn how to create this stunning website, a project you can proudly showcase in your resume to highlight your skills, but also dive into key JavaScript logic, advanced styling techniques, and the art of crafting amazing animation effects. I'll guide you through every step, making sure everything is explained clearly and simply. And don't forget, a like and subscribe is a huge support for our growing channel. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the code. For this project, I've prepared 7 images, 6 related to movies and 1 for the search bar. You can either use the images of your choice or download the ones I've provided in my GitHub repository. The repository link is included below. Please visit the repository, give it a star, and download the images from the Images folder. Once downloaded, drag and drop the folder into your code editor. We'll be working with 3 files for this project: index.html, style.css, and app.js. HTML file. Start by creating the basic structure of an HTML fluid, a doc-type HTML declaration, HTML, head, and body tags. Inside the head section, link your style.css file to apply styles to your web page. Moving to the body, create a header element that will serve as the top section of your web page. Inside the header, add an h1 element to display your website logo or title. Below the h1, include a nav element with 4 anchor tags. These links will be for navigation, named as follows: home, movie, anime, and series. Beneath the navigation menu, create a div with the class name search box. Inside this div, add an img tag to display the search icon. Make sure to link the correct image file in the src attribute. Below the image, insert an input element with its type set to text and a placeholder that says search. Once you've added these elements, you'll have the basic structure for your web page header. Now let's move on to styling it in the CSS file. Open your CSS file and we'll start with the body. First, remove the default margin and padding applied by the browser. Then set the background color to black and the text color to white. This creates a clean, dark theme for our page. Next, let's style the header section. Set its display to flex and its height to 70 pixels. Give it a white background so we can clearly see what's happening. Now, to make it look more elegant, apply a blur effect by setting the background blur to 10 pixels and making the background color more transparent. This will really enhance the design and show off the blur effect. To give the header some breathing room, add padding of 0 and 50 pixels. This adds space to the left and right sides. Then set justify content to space between and align items to center to properly align everything within the header. Now, let's move on to the h1 inside the header. Increase its font size to 40 pixels to make it stand out. Before we get to the navigation section, let's style the search box. Start by setting its display to flex and aligning the items to the center. Next, target the search icon image inside the search box. Set its width to 20 pixels and its background color to light gray. Add padding of 5 pixels vertically and 10 pixels horizontally. For the spacing, add a margin right of -1 pixel to avoid gaps, and give the right side of the image a border radius of 10 pixels for rounded corners. Now let's style the input element inside the search box. Add padding of 7.5 pixels vertically and 30 pixels horizontally. Set the background color to light gray and remove any borders or outlines by setting border and outline to none. Finally, just like the image, give the right side of the input field a border radius of 10 pixels for a smooth, rounded look. It's looking great. Next, we'll move on to the nav section. Stay tuned. All right, now let's move on to styling the navigation bar. First, target the nav element itself and set its display to flex. Use justify content space between to evenly space out the items in the nav bar. Next, let's style the anchor tags inside the nav. Remove the underline by setting text decoration to none. Then set the color to light gray, the font size to 20 pixels, and give it a font weight of 700 for boldness. Add padding of 0 and 10 pixels to create some spacing around the links. To add a polished effect, apply a text shadow of 0, 0, 15 pixels with a black color. Now let's add a hover effect to make the links interactive. When the user hovers over a link, change the text color to red and add a transition effect for a smooth professional animation. Let's tweak the logo. Specifically, we'll add a pop of color to the first part of the logo text. Go back to the HTML file, and inside the H1 element for the logo, add a span element. Place the first part of the logo text inside this span and apply an inline style to set its color to red. This small adjustment gives your logo a distinct and stylish look. And that's it. The navigation bar is looking sleek and polished. All right. Let's move back to the HTML file and start setting up the main section of our project. Below the header, create a div with the class name Carousel. This will act as the main container that holds all parts of our project except for the header. Inside the Carousel div, create another div with the class name List. This is where we'll structure a list of items, with each item containing an image and additional content. For each list item, start by adding an image. Use the RC attribute to link to the image you want to display. Below the image, create another div with the class name Content. Inside the Content div, add an H1 element for the movie name. Directly below the H1, create a div with the class name Details. In this Details div, add 4 p tags, each containing details about the movie, such as the release date, genre, and so on. Now, let's add an H4 element with placeholder text like lorem ipsum or any brief description you prefer. Below the H4, create a div with the class name Buttons. Inside this Buttons div, add 2 buttons. The first button should have the class name Download Bteen and the text Download. The second button should have the class name Trailer BTN with the text Trailer. Oh, and it seems I made a mistake earlier with the image link. Let's fix that now and use the correct image. At this point, the page might look like a bit of a mess, but don't worry. We're about to clean it up and style everything beautifully using CSS. Let's move on to styling our carousel section in the CSS. Set its height to 100 VHs and width to 100 VW to ensure it spans the full viewport. Next, set its overflow to hidden and its position to relative. Now we want this carousel to sit at the very top of the page. However, it's currently being pushed down by the header, which has a height of 70 pixels. To fix this, add margin top -70px to the carousel. But wait, there's an issue. The carousel is now overlapping the header. To fix this, go back to the header in your CSS and set its position to relative and its z-index to 100. This ensures the header remains on top of the carousel. Next, let's target the items inside the list of the carousel. Set their width and height to 100% so they take up the entire carousel. Set the position to absolute and use inset 0 to define all 4 sides, top, bottom, left, and right, as 0, which centers the items within the container. Now let's focus on the images inside the carousel items. Set their width and height to 100% so they fill the container perfectly. Use Object Fit Cover to ensure the images scale properly without distortion. Great, now the visuals look clean. Moving on to the content inside the carousel, target the content class and style it as follows. Set the position to absolute. Position it 10% from the top of the container. For larger screens, set the width to 140 pixels, but also include a max width of 80% to keep it responsive. Center the content horizontally by setting left 50% and applying transform translate x minus 50%. This ensures the content is perfectly aligned in the center of the page. Add padding right 30% to give the layout some breathing room. Use box sizing border box to ensure padding doesn't affect the content width. Finally, add a subtle text shadow to make the text stand out against the background. Now that we've styled the carousel container and its content, let's move on to styling the individual parts of the content, one by one. Let's dive into styling the carousel content, starting with the H1 element. Set the font size to 65%, make it bold, and apply text wrap now wrap to prevent the text from breaking onto a new line. Next, target the details class. Set its display to flex, apply text wrap now wrap, and add a margin bottom 20 pixels. However, if the styling isn't applying, let's check the HTML. There's a simple spelling mistake in the class name. Remember, even a small typo can stop your code from working, so always double check your code carefully before moving on. Now, let's style the paragraphs inside the details class. First, add a border right of 2 pixels in white, set the font size to 25 pixels, make it bold, and change the text color to gold. Add padding of 0 and 10 pixels to give the text some spacing. That looks great. But wait, we don't want the last paragraph to have a border. To fix this, target the last paragraph specifically and set its border to none. Perfect. Moving on to the H4 element inside the content, set its max width to 400 pixels, adjust the font size to 17 pixels, and set a line height of 25 pixels for better readability. Now let's style the buttons class. Start by setting its display to flex to align the buttons side by side. Next, focus on the download button with the class download btn. Set its width to 150 pixels, apply padding of 12 pixels on the top and bottom, and make the font bold. Set the border to none, and give it a background color of gold with black text. Add a box shadow, a border radius of 20 pixels for rounded edges, and a margin right of 10 pixels for spacing between buttons. Apply a transition of 0.4 seconds to make interactions smoother, and finally, set the cursor to pointer. Now, copy this same styling for the trailer button. Just change the background color to white instead of gold. Let's finish by adding some hover effects for the buttons. When the user hovers over a button, reduce its opacity to 0.7 and increase the box shadow for a more dynamic look. And there you have it. Now let's add a video trailer section below the content. First, go to your HTML file and inside the content, create a div with the class name vidbox. Inside this div, add a video element. Link the video file in the src attribute, set its type to MP4, and add the controls attribute to enable video playback controls. Assign an ID of vid to the video element for further styling or scripting. Now, let's move to the CSS to style this section. Target the vidbox class and give it a border of 5 pixels, set it to solid, and assign a gold color to make it stand out. Set its width to 250 pixels, height to 140 pixels, and apply a border radius of 20 pixels for rounded corners. Add a margin top of 100 pixels to create spacing from the previous elements, and set overflow to hidden. Finally, add a box shadow to give it a sleek appearance. Next, let's resize the video itself. Target the video element inside the vidbox and set its width to 250 pixels and height to 140 pixels to match the container. Perfect, the video section is now complete. Now let's work on the thumbnail. But before that, we need more carousel items. Inside the carousel list in the HTML, we currently have one item element, but we need 6 in total. Simply copy the existing item and paste it 5 more times. For each item, you should specify a different image, update the content details, and link a unique trailer video. For the sake of time, I'll just link placeholder images and videos here, but you can customize them later. Once that's done, let's create the thumbnail section. Inside the carousel element, below the list div, create another div with the class name thumbnail. Inside this div, add another div with the class name item, which contains an image element for the thumbnail image. Below the image, add a div with the class name thumb content. And inside this, add another div with the class name title, which holds the movie name. Repeat this process to create 5 more thumbnail item elements, assigning a different image and title for each one. Now let's style the thumbnail section with CSS. Target the thumbnail class and set its position to absolute, with the bottom positioned 50 pixels from the bottom of the page and the left positioned at 50% of the screen width. Set the width to max content and a z-index of 100 so it appears above other elements. To make the thumbnails visible and aligned properly, set their display to flex and assign a gap of 20 pixels between each item. Let's move on to styling the thumbnail and adding arrow buttons. First, target the item inside the thumbnail and set its width to 150 pixels and height to 220 pixels. Set flex shrink to cover and position it as relative. Now style the image inside the item. Set its width and height to 100% and apply object fit cover to ensure the image scales proportionally. Then give it a border radius of 50 pixels to create smooth, rounded edges. Looks good, but let's make it more visually appealing. Target the thumbnail again and add a background color of light gray. Assign a backdrop filter blur 10px heat to create a soft blur effect. Make the background color slightly transparent to better showcase the blur effect. For rounded corners, set border top left radius and border bottom left radius to 50 pixels. Finally, add a box shadow of 0,020 pixels to enhance the design. Next, fix the thumbnail text position. Set its position to absolute with bottom 10 pixels, left 40 pixels, and right 10 pixels. Now let's create the arrow buttons. Go back to your HTML file and inside the carousel div below the thumbnail section, create a div with the class name arrows. Inside this div, add 2 buttons with the class names prev and next. Now style the arrows in your CSS. Set its position to absolute with top 80ts%, right 42%, and a z-index of 100. Assign it a width of 300 pixels and a max width of 30%. Set its display to flex with a gap of 10 pixels and align the items to the center. Oh, we forgot to add arrow icons inside the buttons. Add them in your HTML. Next, style the buttons. Set their width and height to 50 pixels, give them a border radius of 50%, and set their border to none. Use a background color of gray, making it slightly transparent with a text color of black. Set the font size to 25 pixels and font weight to bold, and ensure the cursor changes to a pointer when hovered. Finally, add hover effects to the buttons. When the user hovers over them, change the background color to light gray and assign a box shadow for a more dynamic effect. Don't forget to add a transition effect for a smoother interaction. Now that we have the basic framework of the design in place, let's move on to the main part, adding animations and making the slider responsive using JavaScript. In this design, we want the first item in the carousel list to always appear as the active item on the screen. To achieve this, let's target the first item in the carousel list and set its z-index to 1. This ensures it remains on top and is visible. Next, let's enhance the content of the first item by adding an animation effect to make it more visually appealing. Start by targeting the content of the first item. Assign it a filter effect of blur and set its opacity to 0 so it remains hidden initially. At this point, we'll introduce an animation called Show Content. This animation will run over 1 second, gradually changing the blur effect from 20px to 0 and increasing the opacity from 0 to 1, making the content appear smoothly. Once applied, the animation looks great and gives the design a polished, professional touch. Next, we're going to create an animation for when the user clicks the Next button. The goal is to make it look like the first image in our thumbnail enlarges and seamlessly transitions to replace the large image displayed on the screen. When the user clicks the Next button, our JavaScript will add a next class to the carousel class. This next class will define specific initial attributes for the image, such as a width of 150 pixels, a height of 220 pixels, a position set to absolute, a bottom value of 50 pixels, a left value of 50%, a border radius of 100%. We'll then run an animation called Show Image. This animation will last 0.5 seconds and gradually transform the image. The changes will include the bottom changing to 0, the left changing to 0, the width expanding to 100%, the height increasing to 100%, the border radius resetting to 0. This process will create a smooth enlargement effect that makes the image transition to its new position seamlessly. Each time the user clicks the Next button, JavaScript will dynamically apply the next class to the carousel, ensuring this animation runs flawlessly. Don't worry if this sounds a bit confusing. It's just JavaScript. You're always going to feel a little confused at first. With JavaScript handling the animations, everything will look much smoother and more refined. Next, let's add an animation effect for the thumbnail. When the user clicks the Next button, we'll apply an animation called Next to the thumbnail. This animation will, over the course of 0.5 seconds, smoothly shift the thumbnail 150 pixels from right to left, making it look dynamic and engaging. Next, let's focus on the Back button. When the user clicks the Back button, the second item in the carousel will become the active item. To achieve this, we'll target the second item and set its z-index to 200, ensuring it appears above the first item. Next, target the second item again and set its position to absolute, bottom 0, then run an animation called outFrame. This animation will last 0.5 seconds and will transform the image's size and position as follows. The width will shrink to 150 pixels, the height will shrink to 220 pixels, the bottom will adjust to 50 pixels, the left will shift to 50%, the border radius will round to 50 pixels. When the user clicks the Back button, the Prev class will be added to the carousel, triggering the outFrame animation. This ensures a smooth and visually appealing transition. Next, let's add an animation for the carousel content. When the user clicks the Back button, an animation called Content Out will be applied. Over 1.5 seconds, this animation will gradually increase the blur filter of the content to 20 pixels, reduce the opacity to 0. Once complete, this creates a clean and polished visual effect. Everything is looking great now. Next, when the user presses the Next or Prev button, we need to ensure they cannot press any other buttons during the slider animation process. This can be achieved by setting the pointer events to none for the duration of the animation. Once the animation completes, pointer events will be re-enabled. The final element we're going to add to our project is the Time class. This class will visually display the running time of the animation. In the CSS file, target the time element and style it as follows. Set its position to absolute, assign a z-index of 999, set its width initially, set its height to 5 pixels. Use a background color of red, position it at left, 0, and top. When the user presses the next or prev button, will trigger a 2-second animation called running time. This animation will reduce the width of the time element from 100% to 0, creating a visual indication of the animation's progress. That looks fantastic so far. Now let's make the design responsive for mobile devices. Currently, the website looks good on desktop and tablets, but it isn't optimized for smaller screens. In your CSS, we'll apply different styles for screens smaller than 900 pixels. Here's what we'll do. 1. Target the content of the items and change its padding to 0. 2. Adjust the font size of the H1 to 50 pixels. 3. Target the paragraphs inside the details class and set their font size to 17 pixels. 4. For the H4, set its margin to 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 0 pixels on the left and right. 5. Hide the navigation bar by setting its display to none. You can replace it with a sidebar using a hamburger menu. If you're interested, I have a full tutorial on creating a hamburger menu, and I'll include the link in the description. 6. For the vid box, reduce its margin top to 15 pixels. 7. Adjust the header padding to 0 pixels for the top and bottom and 10 pixels for the left and right. 8. Change the content's top distance to 10%. 9. For the thumbnail, adjust its position to 70% from the top. 10. Finally, reposition the arrow buttons so the left arrow is at 10%. Now let's style the design further for screens smaller than 700 pixels. After these adjustments, the design looks perfect across all devices. Now it's finally time to introduce JavaScript into our project. Before we dive into the coding, let's make a few quick changes in the HTML file. 1. Change the classes of the arrow buttons to IDs. 2. Add a script element at the very end of the body section below all the existing code. Link this script element to our app.js file. That's all for the setup in HTML. Now, let's move to the app.js file. The first step is to access the HTML elements we'll be working with in JavaScript. Here's how we do it. 1. Start by selecting the Next button. Use document.getElementById and pass the ID of the Next button as a string. Save the result in a variable called nextDom. JavaScript const nextDom equals document.getElementById next. 2. Similarly, select the previous button using document.getElementById and save it in another variable. 3. Use document.querySelector to select the Carousel class, which contains all the items we'll be animating. For next, target the thumbnail class, which holds all the thumbnail images. 5. Grab the individual items inside the thumbnail and save them into a variable. 6. Finally, select the items inside the carousel, which will also be part of the animation process. That's it. We now have all the HTML elements we need to work with in JavaScript. When the user clicks the Next button, a function will run with a variable whose value is set to next. Let's assume we have a function called showSlider to handle this process. The function will first retrieve the list of all slider items and thumbnail images. When the user clicks the Next button, the appendChild method will move the first child of the slider list to the end, allowing the second item to take the place of the first. The same process will be applied to the thumbnail images, with the first thumbnail moved to the end of the list. After this, the next class will be added to the carousel class, triggering the corresponding animation. At this point, the animation will work perfectly, but you may notice that the next or prev buttons only be clicked once during the animation. This happens because the next or prev class is added to the carousel, disabling the button's pointer events to prevent interference during the animation. To resolve this, a Running timer will automatically remove the next or prev class from the carousel class after 2 seconds. This ensures that the buttons become active again once the animation completes. To achieve this functionality, we need a variable named runTimeout to work with the setTimeout function. The setTimeout function will ensure that the next class is removed from the carousel class after 3 seconds. As a result, the animation completes smoothly, and after 2 seconds, the user can click the next button again to trigger the animation. Next, let's make the previous button work. When the user clicks the previous button, the show slider function will also run, but this time we'll pass a value indicating previous. If the user clicks the previous button, the prepend method will move the last item to the first position in the slider list. Similarly, the last thumbnail image will be moved to the first position. After this, we'll add the previous class to the carousel class, enabling the animations to run as expected. Just like with the next button, we'll also use the setTimeout function to remove the previous class after 2 seconds, ensuring everything resets properly. Now you can see that both the next and previous buttons are working seamlessly, and the animations are smooth and visually appealing. Let me know if you need further refinements.